On the night the radio went silent, most people didn't notice at first. Radios fade in and out all the time. Static, storms, the usual excuses. But for the people who lived in that narrow valley, tucked between two mountains that shielded them from the rest of the world, the sound of the late-night broadcast was more than background noise. It was a heartbeat. And when that heartbeat stopped, something shifted in the dark. For 30 years, the station had been a companion to anyone still awake after midnight. Truck drivers on the highway, nurses heading home from late shifts, teenagers who kept their radios low so their parents wouldn't hear. And of course, the small circle of insomniacs who swore the voice on that station, Station 11, felt like it spoke directly to them. That voice belonged to a man named Samuel Hart. He wasn't famous. He didn't want to be. He had an easy, unhurried way of talking, as if he'd lived long enough not to fear silence. He told stories, local legends, forgotten histories, calls from listeners who needed someone to hear them. A man once said Samuel's show kept him from driving off the interstate when everything in his life felt like it was falling apart. Another caller said he'd never met Samuel, but Samuel felt like the last honest friend he had. It wasn't the kind of radio that made headlines. It was the kind that held people together. And then at 12:03 a.m. on a Thursday, the signal vanished. Not crackled, not weakened, vanished. Some listeners said they heard a faint click just before the silence. Others said the volume seemed to dip for a moment, as if Samuel had stepped away from the microphone. A few people, those who had trained ears, who'd worked in tech or broadcasting, said the cut was too clean to be an accident, like the station had been unplugged from the world. The next morning, the station issued a statement claiming technical difficulties. But anyone who truly listened knew something else had happened. The station was too small, too old, too underfunded to make clean cuts. Their outages were messy, static-filled, chaotic. This one felt deliberate. Over the following days, rumors started to pool in the quiet corners of the town. Some said Samuel had quit without warning. Others insisted he'd been fired for something he said on air. A few whispered that he'd been threatened. None of it made sense. Station 11 wasn't political. Samuel never talked about anything that would spark controversy. He talked about people, about their stories, and maybe that was the problem. A week after the silence began, a former engineer from the station finally spoke up, off the record, afraid of being named. He said Samuel had been working on a series, one he hadn't aired yet. Something about a land deal going wrong, a set of documents someone slipped under the station door. He said the truth mattered, the engineer whispered, but not everyone agreed. There were no official details, no recordings, nothing concrete, just a feeling that Samuel had stumbled into something bigger than the valley, bigger than the station, bigger than late-night radio had ever meant to handle. But the strange part, despite the investigation that followed, the reporters, the questions, the sudden interest from people who'd never listened before, not a single person could find Samuel. His house was untouched, no sign of struggle. His car was still parked outside the station, but Samuel himself was gone, leaving only the memory of a voice people trusted and an empty chair in a sound booth filled with dust. Most stations would have replaced him, hired someone new, rebranded, but Station 11 didn't. They ran daytime programs, old playlists, occasional ads. But every night at midnight, the frequency stayed blank. Almost like they were keeping the seat warm. Almost like they were waiting for him to walk back in. Months passed. For some listeners, the silence became its own ritual. They'd tune in and sit there in the dark, listening to the nothingness, imagining what Samuel might have said if he were still there. That unexpected stillness made people reflect, not just on the mystery of Samuel Hart, but on the fragile threads that connect us to one another, threads we hardly notice until they snap. Experts later tried to explain it. They said humans read meaning into patterns, even the absence of patterns. That silence can feel louder than any voice when it interrupts something we rely on. They talked about parasocial bonds, auditory memory, emotional imprinting, all the psychology terms you'd expect when trying to explain why one missing voice could shake a community. But if you talk to the listeners, the ones who were there, who knew the late night show by heart, they'll tell you something different. They'll say Samuel didn't simply disappear. They'll say he left something behind, a kind of echo, a feeling that someone was still out there, trying to speak the truth, even if the microphone had gone dead.
Subtle rustle of clothing on three figures.
Some believe he left because he had to. Some believe he was silenced. And some believe he chose the quiet, chose to vanish before the world could take what little honesty he had left to give. To this day, no one knows where Samuel went or what was in those documents he received. But sometimes if you drive through the valley late at night and tune your radio just right, you'll hear something. Maybe static, maybe imagination, maybe the ghost of a frequency that refuses to die. A reminder that even the smallest voice can matter to people more than you'll ever understand. And maybe that's the real story here. Not the disappearance, not the mystery, but the simple truth that one person with a microphone, speaking gently into the dark, can hold a whole town together until the night the radio goes silent.